Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivadadhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivadadhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivadadhari Girivadadhari Jasodanandana Brajajananjana Jasodanandana Brajajananjana Jamunati Ravanachari Jamunati Ravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagataraja Astatarasatasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaura Premanandi. I've been reading in Canto 2, Canto 1, Chapter 2. I'm looking for the last verse. Not sure. Maybe you can get the verse on the screen. You can do that. Can you get the show the verse on the screen? Is that possible or no? I beg your pardon? Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, we'll skip it. I'll just read the verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'm going to read 3 verses, starting with Canto 1, Chapter 2, verse number 30, then 31, 32. If you can find the verse on your little handheld device, look it up. 1, 2, 30. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirayat sa evedam sasarjagre evedam sasarjagre Bhagavan Atma Mayaya Sad Asad Rupaya Chaso Gunamaya Guna Vibhu In the beginning of the material creation, that absolute personality Godhead Vasudev, in his transcendental position, created the energies of cause and effect by his own internal energy. Purport. The position of the Lord is always transcendental because the causal and effectual energies required for the creation of the material world were also created by him. He is unaffected, therefore, by the qualities of the material modes. His existence, form, activities, and paraphernalia all existed before material creation. He is, in italics, he is all spiritual and had nothing to do with the qualities of the material world, which are qualitatively distinct from the spiritual qualities of the Lord. Text 31. Taya vilasate shveshu guneshu gunavan iva antak pravishta abhati vijnanena vijimbitaha. After creating the material substance, the Lord Vasudeva expands himself and enters into it. And although he is within the material modes of nature and appears to be one of the created beings, he is always fully enlightened in his transcendental position. Purport. The living entities are separated parts and parcels of the Lord, and the conditioned living entities who are unfit for the spiritual kingdom are strewn within the material world to enjoy matter to the fullest extent. As Paramatma and external friend of the living entities, the Lord, by one of his plenary portions, accompanies the living entities to guide them in their material enjoyment and to become witness of all activities. While the living entities enjoy the material conditions, the Lord maintains his transcendental position without being affected by the material atmosphere. In the Vedic literature, Shruti, it is said that there are two birds in one tree. One of them is eating the fruits of the tree while the other is witnessing the actions. The witness is the Lord, and the fruit eater is the living entity. The fruit eater living entity has forgotten his real identity and is overwhelmed in the fruitive activities of the material conditions. But the Lord, Paramatma, is always full in transcendental knowledge. That is the difference between the supersoul and the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul, the living entity, is controlled by the laws of nature, while the Paramatma, the supersoul, is the controller of the material energy. I think I'll just cover those two verses for this morning. The verses before these two verses are important to bear in mind because they've established many things, fundamental truths about the absolute truth. That which is the source of everything has been already established, and the Bhagavatam is revealing the absolute truth being the source of everything in full. And what's in this section, starting with this verse, is just a new message. It's the process of creation, not the details, because that will come later, the unfolding of creation. Sarga, the unfolding of creation from the personality of Godhead. But back to the fundamental, there is an absolute truth, that which is the cause of everything else. And then the message here is from the first of these two verses, text 30. How is creation effected? The creation is effected through the energies of that absolute truth. So the cause, sat asad, are the Sanskrit terms. Evedam sasar jagre Bhagavan Atmamaya. His Atmamaya, his spiritual potencies become transformed by his will to the cause and the effect of material energies. Because he is the cause of all causes, which is fundamental, sarva karana karanam. But although he is the cause of all causes, he, the cause of all causes, creates effects which then become causes, which then become effects, which then become causes. And the downstream effect of the cause of all causes, creating the principles of cause and effect of the material world, while he, the cause of all causes, remains aloof from or separate from the impact. So he's not created, he's the creator, and the creation has its causes and effects, and he's not influenced by those causes and effects. He remains transcendental to both the energies in principle, and then specifically the next verse is speaking about the modes of Prakriti, and then the free will choices of the living entity moving about Prakriti, para Prakriti, moving about apara Prakriti, making choices, and the Supreme Lord expands, just as speaking principle now, not all the details, because the details will come later. These are just establishing fundamental principles. The living entities are facilitated. The living entities, those living entities who want to have separate from the Supreme Enjoyer's enjoyment, they want to have their own enjoyment, then that's an impetus for the Supreme Lord to create the material world where they can so-called try to be enjoyers. And in that process, he, the Supreme Lord, the cause of all causes, expands himself. In an aspect that's not the fullness of the ultimate cause, the fullness of the ultimate cause distinction is mainly in terms of rasa. This is Rupa Goswami's teaching in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. The main distinction between the cause of all causes, Krishna, in the spiritual world, and his expansion, Vasudev, which is being spoken of here, the language Vasudev, the all-pervasive Vasudev, is expanded into this material creation, and the three Vishnu forms do what they do in terms of creation, and specifically focus is going to the Kshirodakshai Vishnu or Paramatma feature, that he, that living entity, the supreme living entity, is accompanying the rebellious living entity. Supreme living entity is accompanying the rebellious living entity in two capacities, Upadrashta and Anumanta. That is, Upadrashta, he's the witness. We can't hide anything from Krishna. We can try, but we hide something from this person, that person, the other person for a little while, and then it gets discovered, maybe. But we can't hide anything from Krishna because he's the super soul, supremely conscious person situated in the heart, and he recognizes the living entity's aspirations for fruitive activities. Reference is made in the purport. In the footnote, Prabhupada gives the actual Mundaka Upanishad reference, Dva Suparna, two birds situated in a tree. It's metaphorical. The body is the tree. Within the body, within the tree, there's two birds, the enjoying bird and the witness bird. And the witness bird doesn't just witness, he's neutral in that he just witnesses and notes this is the desire, the effort, the conscious aspiration for fruitive enjoyment. I want to enjoy this fruit, that fruit, and then sanctions. Or sanction sanction means giving permission, but it doesn't stop there. He gives permission, and then the living entity has to work it out. His permission or his sanction means the Prakriti moves. He's the cause of all causes. Prakriti doesn't move on its own. So the living entity is desiring, but the living entity desiring can't move Prakriti. It requires the sanction of the controller of Prakriti. The living entity isn't the controller of Prakriti. In delusion, they may think, but the living entity is not. They can do something if and only if the sanction of the Supreme Lord is awarded. That is to say, conversely, if the Supreme Lord says no, then it doesn't happen. And if the Supreme Lord said yes, it doesn't stop there, but the sanction means Prakriti starts to move, and then the living entity engaging with Prakriti can act as an instrument of that sanction and try to be the enjoyer. In other words, the picture that's being painted through words is we're not independent. There's one who's independent, and all others are dependent. Dependent doesn't mean we lose our free will. Dependent means free will cannot be fulfilled without the independent. And if the independent says no, it doesn't happen. Let me take the simple one. Someone may want to be immortal, not just Hiranyakashipu. People want to live forever. They don't want to die. I mean, some people want to die. But most part, living entities, they want to survive, struggle for survival. To some extent, some people live older. Some people live shorter. But, the imminence of birth, death, disease, and old age, that's an arrangement of Prakriti by the sanction of the Supreme Lord, because that's just the ways of material nature. And we don't have a choice in the matter. You can say, I don't want to become old. Okay. You can say, I don't want to become old, but you'll get old, and so forth. We're controlled. And the sanction of the Supreme Lord. So why the why questions become many. Like, why all this rigmarole? That's Sanatana Goswami's two questions. You know those two questions. Who am I? And why must I suffer the threefold tapatrayon rulanam? Why must I suffer miseries of material existence? Why is it that I'm compelled? I don't want, and I'm compelled. Why? Why questions are nice questions. Misuse of free will. And therefore, we're given the opportunity with that misuse of free will. It's sanctioned. It's not preferred. Preferred is already given. Mame kam sharanam. But that's what Krishna wants. Living as you say, no. Okay, what do you want? Blah, blah, blah. And if it's sanctioned, then you go down the blah, blah, blah path. Given by arrangements, the facilities of material nature, then one gets a certain type of body and certain set of senses and certain objects of the senses and the opportunity, at least, to try to become the enjoyer of the sense object through the senses. Knowing leads to supreme independent is knowing there's misery down that path. Minimally. The real happiness isn't found. And then, secondarily, one becomes attached to the expectation of happiness, and when the expectation of happiness isn't fulfilled, there's frustration. You get a negative experience, a negative emotion. So try it again and try it again, and endlessly. It's the spirit of separate enjoyment that's the problem, or you could say is ignorance of what our real position of happiness is. So back to the two verses that we discussed this morning. Vasudeva, the absolute truth, recognizing the living entity, the tiny spark living entity, desire to be a separate enjoyer, then it's the domino program, the Sat Asat, the Atma Maya by his spiritual potency, the cause and effect potencies to facilitate the desired living entity. And the emphasis, one more time, is while sanctioning Upadrashta and Anumanta by witnessing and sanctioning, that same Paramatma isn't implicated in the modes of material nature, the activities of trying to be the enjoyer. He remains neutral. He remains independent. The Supreme doesn't lose his independence. Living entities may think themselves independent. They're not. And the more they try to exercise their independence, the more they become entangled and restricted. We'll go the other direction. The more the living entity recognizes dependence, the more there's more freedom. Sounds like a contradiction. I'm dependent, now I have more freedom. There's less restriction. I'm still not the supreme independent, but I have more freedom. It's like, a good citizen has more freedom than a criminal. The criminal may think, the heck with the laws of the state. So he's restricted. Apprehended. Though man's law may be fallible, God's law is not fallible. Nothing, you can hide something from the omniscient supreme. So freedom becomes restricted. The tiny freedom becomes restricted by misuse of that power of freedom. And the more one properly submits one's freedom, one's free will choice to the independent in that subservient position, the more there's freedom. Not unlimited, never, ever, ever unlimited freedom, but more freedom or less freedom, more restrictions imposed by the Supreme. if someone's rebellious or somewhat submissive. Many of us have heard, I'll repeat what many of us have heard many times. Prabhupada's description of Dharma. Dictionary definition, a type of faith. Sanskrit definition, the constitutional position of something is the Dharma. The Dharma of sugar is sweet. If you have a crystal and it's not sweet, then it's not sugar. It can be some crystal of something else. It may look like, but it's not because the characteristic is sweet. Or another example Prabhupada likes to give is water. Now, water can be evaporated or water can be frozen. Then it's a different state, but the water is liquid. Similarly, faith can change, but intrinsic is there's a characteristic of a living entity. The characteristic of living entity is service. The dharma of living entity is service. And even more explicitly, the dharma of living entity is service to the Supreme. There may be transformations of that sense of dharma in the material atmosphere where one becomes then the servant of someone. Or, if not the servant of someone, then servant of their senses. And even if they're the servant of someone, they're the servant of their senses, thinking this is happiness. And then trying to serve the senses of someone else that's going to bring them happiness or bring me happiness to bring them happiness or something like that. But the main point here is that the constitutional position of living entity is service misapplied. And those living entities that misapply fundamentally, they're awarded bodies and minds. They cause and effect. Sadasat, that's the verse. Text 30. I'll read the verse, the translation. In the beginning of the material creation, the absolute personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, in his transcendental position, created the energies of cause and effect. Sa evedam sasar jagre Bhagavan Atmamaya Sadasad Rupaya. By his own potency, he created the energies of cause and effect. After creating the material substance, the Lord, Vasudeva, expands himself and enters into it. So it's not the detail, it's not the slow motion detail, it's the high level principle. It's Prakriti that has cause and effect, push and pull. And he enters into it. And although he is within the material modes of nature and appears to be one of the created beings, he is always fully enlightened in his transcendental position. Never deluded, his independence is not lost. The living entity's independence is restricted. They're never independent, they're dependent. And that dependence is further restricted by the coverings, and specifically they're identifying with the covering, specifically their attempt to become the enjoyer of Prakriti and thus implicated in the laws. Say it conversely. What if someone doesn't have that conception? Then the material energy acts differently. I'll end with this. In the description of Sarga, or the Lord Vishnu's creation, which is just touched on in these two verses, is expanded in at least two different places in the third canto Bhagavatam. In the third canto Bhagavatam, we heard this in our classes the other day. Maitreya speaks to Vidura. Third canto. Something like 16 chapters. Now, there's many topics, but Sarga is one of those subtopics because he's teaching Bhagavatam. Maitreya is teaching Bhagavatam to Vidura. I mean, he's teaching transcendental knowledge, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. So within that transcendental knowledge, there's this position of Sarga. And the main emphasis is like here. The main emphasis is the purpose of creation is because we want it. We want to be enjoyers, and so the facility to be the enjoyer is provided. And those who have that aspiration suffer. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. The misery itself is, the material creation itself is misery, and it's temporary. Whatever it is. The happiness, distress is temporary. The whole thing, the whole show is temporary. And then there, in the same canto, Canto 3, there's a second description of Sarga. Much of it is similar because there's principles. There's some details that are dissimilar, but it's not in contradiction, this one, that one. It's just dissimilar in some certain aspects. But the emphasis is the other purpose of creation. What's the other purpose of creation? Kapila Dev teaches Devahuti, the purpose is to get release from that inspired, misapplied aspiration to become the enjoyer and instead take up devotional service. That's Sankhya. Sankhya properly applied leads to bhakti. And that's Kapila's teachings to Devahuti. So living entities have choices. Limited, not independent, dependent. And if the living entity turns to the supreme living entity, then there's no necessity to go jumping from branch, dvasaparna, to go from one branch to branch, trying to be the enjoyer of the fruits of that tree, the body, the fruits of work. Necessities are supplied by the Supreme without that separate endeavor. But if one is a bird, you don't have transcendental knowledge. You go from branch to branch trying to find something to eat, some fruits, the enjoyer of the fruits of activity, as in animals and in birds and also in human beings, without transcendental knowledge. The Bhagavatam, and for that matter, the whole of creation, built into the whole of creation, along with the creation comes Vedic wisdom. Like, here's a machine, how to use the machine. It's just one of the procedures when you buy something. There's the operator's manual. You can try to use your cell phone as a nutcracker, but that's not what it's meant for. You can break your cell phone. There's a way it's meant to be used, and it's the operator's manual. So this human form of life, we get a body, and we get the operator's manual. The Vedas. Here's how to properly use it. And necessities are supplied. One who properly uses it, the human form. And then built into that operator's manual system is stages of consciousness to restore original consciousness. And that's Kapila's teachings of the purpose of Sarga, material creation. So here we're just getting, touching on it. The main point, I'll end. The main point is it's all coming from a source. Vasudev is the absolute truth. And recognizing the absolute truth through sound is the Vedic process. It's the Bhagavad Dharma process. Hearing about Bhagavan through Srimad Bhagavatam. So each and every step, it's the Bhagavat Purana, the history of the Supreme Person, Bhagavan, and the living entities that are in relation to Bhagavan, the Bhagavatas. Bhagavan and Bhagavata. Canto 1, Chapter 2. It just gives a foundation, and then expand it and expand it. So it's nice to get the foundation clear, because it will help to understand the expansion and expansion. Further explanations. Let's see if there's some discussion. 12 minutes after 8.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
I hear you.
About expansion, Krishna expansion, we heard 4 expansion first. Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. So during Balram Purnima, this topic was coming like everything is expansion from Lord Balaram. So Krishna expands at Balaram. Then 4 Chaturvyuha from Balaram, or Krishna directly expands and Balaram, and it's same as Sankarshan, and Vasudeva is same as Krishna. So like Balaram comes, then 4 Chaturvyuha, or the 4 Chaturvyuha is same, like Sankarshan is same as Balaram.
You're looking at the sequence, and the answer
Yes.
is Balaram is the first expansion.
Okay, then the 4.
Balaram, from Balaram comes the Chaturvyuha.
So the Vasudeva form of Krishna is coming from Balaram.
Because Balaram comes from Krishna,
Right.
the Vasudeva comes from Krishna, but through the agency of Balaram.
Right, okay. So Balaram is before Chaturvyuha. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Vasudeva expansion is not the original. The Vasudeva expansion is an expansion.
Yes.
It's in the category, there's Sanskrit terms, but it's in the category of Angsa.
And Balaram is considered Ansha or
No, he is non-different. He's just an expansion.
non-different. Similarly, Radharani is non-different.
Well, you're getting all mixed up. She is not non-different. She's the Shakti of.
Okay.
Be careful with the language.
Okay.
Because you're asking these types of things.
Yes.
So she's not non-different. She is the pleasure potency of Bhagavan. Swayam Bhagavan. Balaram has his Shaktis. Balaram, is Krishna's first expansion. And he has his Shaktis. But there's one who is the Sarva Karana Karanam.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Not from this class, Maharaj, but I have a question about, since nowadays, like all of everything becomes digitalized, right, online. So a lot of books.
Can you stay on the topic of this morning's class?
Yes, it's related with Bhagavatam.
Okay, related to this morning's class. Can you relate it to this morning's class? I'm requesting. You got an itch, you want to scratch it. I'm trying to ask you to stay focused on the topic that we're discussing this morning.
Not really from today's class, Maharaj.
Huh?
Not really from
Okay.
today's.
Anything else?
Can
Yeah, sure.
So about the happiness, the jiva want happiness, and we are all looking for happiness in wrong place.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so the one of the class I gave, there was one Western boy. He was sitting. I think he used to come on Sunday feast. He asked like, how do we know that we are enjoying right? The question was like, do we deserve to be enjoying, or if we are enjoying, how do we know that we are properly enjoying? So I think you also were there. You also commented on that class. That boy was asking. So this is the teenager, boys in college, Western, asking like, how do we properly enjoy? So how to answer those kind of audience?
Brahmabhuta prasanatma nasochati nakangsati samakserveshu bhuteshu. Enjoyment is devoid of material hankering and lamenting. Say it in the reverse. When there's real enjoyment, material hankering and lamenting are gone. Say it the other way. As long as there's material hankering and lamenting, we haven't reached the position of real enjoyment. So just like define what real enjoyment is. How do we know if we're enjoying the right way? When there's no longer hankering or lamenting on the material platform. Now, I haven't experienced that because I experience hankering and lamenting. So that means we haven't experienced what real happiness is. By definition, fundamental definition. And it makes sense. The simple example is the eating process. At a certain point of time when you're eating and eating, you don't need someone to tell you you've eaten enough. Somebody may tell you, but you can tell them, no thanks, no more, I'm full. And when that no more, I'm full condition exists, not only during eating, but in life, there's no more hankering, lamenting. That's what real happiness is. That's a litmus test of where real happiness is. Then you can say it conversely. Real happiness is not where there's hankering and lamenting. So how do I know? That's how you know. Is there such a thing? Yes. What's that such a thing? Brahmabhuta. And from that Brahmabhuta platform, devotional service is facilitated. Now, supposing I'm not at the Brahmabhuta stage, I'm still hankering and lamenting, can I do devotional service? You can practice. You should practice. But the practice stage, the full happiness is not experienced yet because there's still hankering, lamenting. But it's the path to get there. And when one gets there, there's no more hankering, lamenting. Is it attainable? Of course, it's not. It's not a fairy tale. It's not fiction. It's attainable. It's what we're meant. This young student, young person. It's what this is the operator's manual. How to take this human form of life, use it in such a way that state is reached where there's no more hankering, lamenting. You have to use the device properly, and then you can get what the device is meant for. Supposing you don't use it the way the operator's manual says, you can do stuff, but it's not the full facility of the human form of life. How do I know? It's subjective. It's experiential. And then there's the characteristic of when the bell rings, it's no more hankering, no more lamenting. Seeing all living entities equal. That's not normal. It's transcendental. Normal is the conditioned state. The diseased condition is the normal condition, and we don't see like that. Friends and enemies and the whole shebang. Yes, behind you. He's right here. Just give it to him.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I just wanted to appreciate what you just said about real freedom, how freedom is experienced actually when someone becomes dependent on the Lord.
Yeah.
Although it's,
It
sounds like
seems contradictory.
Yes. Yeah. And I just wanted to say, it seems contradictory, but actually, to some degree, we get a practical experience of that. That's why we're practicing this
Yeah,
so-called
there's
bhakti
there's
process.
Vaidhi sadhana
Yeah.
bhakti and there's raga bhakti.
Yeah.
It's like having a leash.
Mm-hmm.
When you have people these days, all over the place, they walk their dog in the morning,
Yeah.
or different times of the day, and the dog's on a leash because that's probably a law. Besides, it's respectful of other people because dogs don't always do the right thing. So the dog that has more freedom has a longer leash, or it's like a cow. In India, the farmer takes the cow, and they put the rope around the cow, and they put in a stake. So that's the radius that the cow can graze that day. And supposing the rope is longer, then they have more. And then supposing they're off in the field, there's still generally there's a fence. There's more freedom, but still restricted. And in the spiritual world, there's no restriction, but there's no need for restriction because it's spontaneous. So Vidhi Sadhana Bhakti is there to guide us to the place where love of God can be achieved. The purpose of that Vidhi is love of God. The purpose of Bhakti is Prema Bhakti. And when there's Prema Bhakti, then the Vidhis don't apply. One still follows Vidhis, but one isn't bound by them in the same way that the sadhaka is bound by them.
Because we see sometimes that devotees can be very attached to the rules and regulations.
That's
and
fine.
Yeah.
That's good. Be attached. Instead of being attached to I'm attached to my freedom.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. So you explained that there should not be, like for the Prabhu's question, that there is no hankering or lamentation. The point that we feel like it's
I'm listening.
fully satisfied. So sometimes we do have in the spiritual activities that we do hanker, we do lament also, right? That is different from, is it same, or can we have that in the spiritual side of our activities?
Do the gopis have a hankering?
Yeah.
Okay. There's the answer to your question.
Okay.
Our hankering isn't Mother Yasoda's hankering. Our lamenting is not Mother Yasoda's lamenting.
Mm.
There's a reflection, there's reality, or there's reflection. So that no hankering, no lamenting means material. What is material? Separate from Krishna.
Mm.
Supposing there's a mix. You follow?
Mm.
That's us. And we try to dial down the separate from Krishna part and dial up the in relation to Krishna part.
Mm.
That's the sadhana. Supposing we don't do that, then it stays material. The musicality of a teenager that likes music, but the satisfaction isn't there because the purpose behind the musicality is missed. There's benefit, but it's not. Back to the question that this comes from. How do I know I'm doing the right thing? Where's the real happiness bell ring? The material portion is gone. Who is at the center? It's another way of saying the same thing. Is who is at the center of hankering, lamenting?
So the purpose.
So that's the test. Is it possible? The answer is yes. Is it possible that one can be a mixed devotee, that I'm thinking about pleasing Krishna, but I'm at the center? My happiness is the real test of, am I doing the right thing? Have achieved happiness because I'm feeling happy? But it's not. It's mixed. So it's same with desire, hankering, lamenting. Desire isn't to be annihilated or anesthetized. How do you move desire to the Krishna's at the center? You follow the vidhis of bhakti. And understand the purpose behind the vidhis of bhakti. You don't just practice music. You meditate on, this is for Krishna's pleasure. Apply it to any, you're cooking in the kitchen. What's the purpose? You don't cook those things, you cook these things. You do it this way, you don't do it that way. What's the purpose? Supposing we're not thinking of the purpose, then it's going to stay on the material platform. And we'll be wanting something on the material platform. The taste, the appreciation, acknowledgement, something. Mind and senses. Material.
Thank you, Maharaj.
And in the spiritual plane, Mother Soda uses her mind and senses and her intelligence. There's one purpose. So this is the practice stage to get to the perfection stage. Okay, let's end. Srila Prabhupada. Oh, you have something. Okay, you give this lady the microphone. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I do not have this hankering or lamenting on the material platform, but I am not having the desire to do for Krishna as much. It ends in brief periods. So how do I?
You cultivate, practice, abhyasa. Following the vidhis, abhyasa. That's the guardrails. You stay in the right lane. You don't go driving in against traffic. You stay in the lane. You follow the vidhis. Keep the speed limit. So you follow the vidhis of bhakti. And practice the internal part while you're doing that. You follow? It's medicine. It's like, supposing you have an illness, supposing you banged your leg. You go to a physical therapist, they give you some exercises to do. The muscles got out of whack, so they're helping you to restore the muscles. So you practice this, practice that, practice this, practice that. It's abhyasa with a purpose, so that you have good health again, and you can move around and function. That's on the material platform. Then the spiritual platform, the spiritual principles, are to bring us to the place where our Krishna prema has become awakened, but it's now dormant. So practice. And that's my answer, with the right purpose behind. Okay.
Thank you.
Prabhupada ki jai.